Do you ever just stop speaking in English because you don't know the correct word? Well, in this video, we'll look at what you can do when you don't know a word, when you think you know a word, but you're not completely sure if it is the correct word, and when you really do know a word, but you just can't think of it at the time when you need to say it. Using the strategies in this video will help you continue conversations and speak more fluently in English. I'm Gillian Scott. I was a Cambridge speaking examiner for over 5 years, and I've been teaching English as a foreign language since 2013. One thing you can do when you don't know a word is use circumlocution. Circumlocution is where you describe the word you don't know by using words that you do know. So, if you don't know the word for this, you could describe it by saying the thing for opening a bottle. So, in a sentence, you could say, for example, "Can you pass me the thing for opening the bottle?" If you don't know the word for this, you could describe it by saying, the building with lights that stops boats coming close to the land. So, in a sentence, you might say, on holiday, I visited a beautiful building. It's the building with lights that stops boats coming close to the land. And by the way, the real word for this is lighthouse, and the real word for this is corkscrew. Another thing you can do when you don't know a word is use superordinates. Superordinates are the categories for groups of things. For example, dog and cat are types of animals. So, the word animal is the superordinate for dog and cat. So, if you don't know the word for this, you could just use its superordinate, vegetable. So, in a sentence, you could say, I need to buy some vegetables. But be careful that you pronounce vegetables correctly. Vegetable is a word that learners of English often pronounce incorrectly because it has a silent syllable. When we pronounce vegetable, we only pronounce 3 syllables. Veg-ta-ble. So listen and repeat. Vegetable. 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 Also, we often shorten vegetables, the plural form, to just veg. So again, if you don't know the word for this, in a sentence, you could say, I need to buy some veg. Another example. If you don't know the word for this, you can just use its superordinate, clothes. So, in a sentence, you can say, for example, do you like my new clothes? Again though, make sure that you pronounce clothes correctly. Clothes is also a word that learners of English often mispronounce. The correct pronunciation is clothes. Listen and repeat. Clothes. 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 And by the way, the word for this is poncho, and the word for this is leak. The next strategy is using synonyms. Synonyms are words that have the same or similar meanings. For example, fantastic, marvelous, and brilliant are all synonyms. Yes, brilliant means the same as fantastic and marvelous. So, if you don't know the word for somebody who teaches other people how to drive, you could say driving teacher. In a sentence, you could say, I'm having a lesson with my driving teacher later today. Using this method means that sometimes you'll say a correct word, but sometimes not. In this example, teacher is not the correct word to use. In English, we don't say driving teacher. But teacher is a synonym of the word that we do say. In English, we say driving instructor. So, if you use the synonym teacher and say driving teacher, you won't be correct. But remember, the aim here is not necessarily to be correct. The aim is to achieve communication and continue the conversation. If you just stop speaking, nobody will have any idea what you're trying to communicate. But if you say something which is a mistake, but close to the correct word, then people will know what you're trying to communicate. Therefore, it's better to use the wrong term, driving teacher, rather than to stop speaking and not communicate anything at all. Making mistakes can help you achieve communication and continue speaking. If you don't know a word, you can use an all-purpose word. All-purpose words are words that you can substitute for the real word, either when you don't know the real word or you can't remember it. The words I'm going to share with you are all real English words that native speakers use when they can't think of the correct word. For objects, we have lots of words related to the word thing. Of course, there's thing itself and also thingy, thingme, thingy-majig, thingy-mabob, and thingamy. The third one on our list is used more in Scotland. So, in a sentence, you could say, where's the blue thingy-mabob? We also have words for objects which are made from phrases that ask the listener for help with the word that the speaker doesn't know or can't remember. What's it is made from the question, what is it? what's its name is made from the question, what's its name? And whatchamacallit is made from the question, what do you call it? And also the interfix ma. An interfix is a letter or group of letters that doesn't carry any meaning and is inserted into the middle of a word in order to make a new word. So, in a sentence, you could say, look at that whatchamacallit! You can also use some of these words if you don't know or if you forget a person's name. For a person, we can use thingy, thingme, thingamajig, and thingymabob. We can also adapt what's its name for people by changing the its part to his or her. So, for a man, we can say, what's his name? And for a woman, we can say, what's her name? Additionally, for people, we can change the name part to face. So, for a man, we can say, what's his face? And for a woman, we can say, what's her face? Furthermore, one of the words we've been looking at can even be used to substitute a verb. If you don't know or can't remember a verb, you can use the verb to thing me. So, in a sentence, you could say, can you just thing me it a bit? When what you really mean is, can you just push it a bit? The next strategy is word coinage. To coin a word means to create a word. Therefore, when you use word coinage, you create a word based on your existing knowledge of how words are formed in English. A great way to do this is to think about your knowledge of prefixes and suffixes. Prefixes are letters that are added to the beginning of a word in order to change its form, and suffixes are letters that are added to the end of a word in order to change its form. Let's think about an example. In English, there are lots of nouns that end with the suffix ment. For example, disappointment, commitment, government, movement, improvement. These are just some examples. So, if you know a verb, for example, the verb to achieve, you can take a chance and put the suffix ment onto the end of the verb to try to create the noun form. In this case, you would create achievement, which is the correct noun form of this word. Of course, though, you might not always create the correct word. There are plenty of nouns in English that do not end with the suffix ment. But remember again, the aim here is not necessarily to be correct. The aim is to achieve communication and continue speaking. So, you might make some mistakes. For example, I often hear English students who speak many different native languages coin the word changement. So, taking the verb to change and adding the suffix ment. But changement is wrong. We do not say changement in English. The correct noun form is change. But think about the next two sentences. Which one achieves communication? Sentence A, I've made a lot of, or sentence B, I've made a lot of changements in my life recently. In sentence A, the speaker could be trying to say anything. I've made a lot of chairs. I've made a lot of tables. I've made a lot of money. We just don't know what the speaker is trying to say. But in sentence B, we do know what the speaker is trying to say. They mean change. So, in sentence B, communication has been achieved, whereas in sentence A, communication has not been achieved at all. Therefore, it's better to make some mistakes, but achieve communication. Another example of word coinage is using the prefix un to make words negative. In English, affirmative adjectives are often made negative by adding the prefix un. For example, happy is affirmative and unhappy is negative. Usual is affirmative and unusual is negative. Able is affirmative and unable is negative. Therefore, if you know the affirmative form of an adjective, you can guess the negative form by adding the prefix un. For example, if you know the adjective believable, you can add the prefix un to try to make the negative form. In this case, you create the word unbelievable, and you would be correct. Unbelievable is the negative form. Of course, though, not all negative adjectives are formed by adding the prefix un. So sometimes you'll make mistakes. For example, if you know the adjective perfect and you try to make the negative form by adding the prefix un, you'll create unperfect, which is not correct. The negative form of perfect is imperfect. But again, I really want to emphasize that here, the aim is not necessarily to be correct. The aim is to achieve communication, continue speaking, continue the conversation. So even if you say unperfect, people will still understand what you mean. You will have achieved communication and you will be continuing the conversation. If you don't know a word, you can ask the people you're speaking with to help you. You shouldn't feel worried about asking other people for help. Almost everybody will want to help you. When I was learning Italian, I used the strategies we're covering in this video, and 99.9% of the time, other people helped me. Although I can think of one person who was always just really awkward and didn't help at all. Okay, but that was only one person, just one person. Everybody else helped me. So you shouldn't feel worried or embarrassed about asking other people for help when you're speaking English. If you don't know a word at all, there are two ways that you can ask for help. The first of these ways is syllable elongation. Syllable elongation is when you pronounce the last syllable before the word you don't know for considerably longer than you normally would. And this signals to the listener that you need help with the following word. For example, if you don't know the word for this, in a sentence, you could say, "My lamp's not working. I need to buy a new..." And then the person you're speaking with should tell you the word that you need. In this case, light bulb. The second way you can ask for help when you don't know a word at all is through repetition. Here, you repeat the last few words before the word you don't know. And again, this tells the listener that you need help with the following word. For example, if you don't know the word for this, in a sentence, you could say, "I need to cut some wood, so I need to buy a..." And then the person you're speaking with should tell you the word. In this case, saw. The next way to ask for help is for situations where you think you know the correct word, but you're not completely sure if it is the right word. In this situation, you can use rising intonation. In English, we often use rising intonation at the end of questions. Therefore, you can use rising intonation on the word that you're not sure about, thereby turning it into a question where you're asking the listener to confirm if the word is correct or not. For example, you could say, "My granddad can't see. He's blind?" Or you could say, "This towel's not dry. It's really damp." Then again, the person you're speaking with can confirm if the word is correct or tell you the correct word to use. The next strategy is using filler words. Filler words are the words we use to fill pauses. They include words like and you know. You know is a contraction of you know. You can use filler words when you do know a word, but you just need a moment to think of it. For example, imagine you need a moment to think of the verb that collocates with bike. You've remembered that we don't say drive a bike, but what do we say? You just need a moment to remember the correct word. When this happens, you can use filler words to give yourself some time to think. For example, you could say, "I was just, riding my bike. Next, we're thinking about Lethologica. Lethologica is when you really do know a word, but you just can't remember it at all at the time when you need to use it. This is something you might have experienced in your native language as well as in English. As this is something that can happen to native speakers, we have some phrases that we use in English when this does happen. A common one is, "It's on the tip of my tongue." It, of course, refers to the word that you can't think of. Another one is, "The word escapes me at the moment." But if you just want to say something more basic, that's fine too. You could just say, "I can't remember the word at the moment." Additionally, you can also use one of these phrases in combination with the filler words that we looked at earlier in order to give yourself a little bit more time to think in order to remember the word. For example, you could say, "I was just, it's on the tip of my tongue, riding my bike." Don't forget, you can also use non-linguistic communication in order to continue a conversation too. You can use mime. For example, "It wasn't big, it was..." So the word I was communicating there was enormous. You can use facial expressions. Facial expressions are universal. All people use the same facial expressions to convey the same meanings. So you can take advantage of this and use facial expressions to help you communicate. For example, you could say, "The food at the restaurant was..." So the word I was communicating there was disgusting. You can imitate sounds. If you can't remember the word for the noise this makes, you could say, "My phone's burp, 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 burp." The real verb for this is to ring. Here we need the ing form, ringing. My phone's ringing. And of course, you can use gestures. If you can see the thing you want to talk about, you can just point at it. The word for this is candle holder. How many of these strategies have you already tried? And how many were new for you? Let me know in the comments. Next, check out this video. Alternatively, watch this playlist, which I also think you'll love. Good luck with your English!